You fit the description. That's the laziest phrase police use, right before the sound of handcuffs clicking on someone's wrist. No proof needed, no investigation required, just a vague enough excuse to turn a person into a target. That night, on I-95, in the biting cold rain of Seattle, a black woman driving a brand new Bentley Continental GT heard those very words. And she knew, at that moment, that this wouldn't be an ordinary stop. Officer Rick Dalton did not see a civilian. He spotted a prey, a car worth over $200,000, gleaming black paint, leather interior still smelling of the showroom, and the driver was a black woman, alone in the rain at night. In Dalton's mind, the calculation went by quickly and dirty. Luxury car plus a black woman always had to be wrong. Dalton doesn't run license plates, no hotline calls, no owner verification. He doesn't need it, because he believed he already knew the answer before turning on his hazard lights. He believed he was on a big heist, catching a stolen car, confiscating the valuables, and maybe getting some extra goods or cash if he was lucky. A quick, clean victory, with no one to question. But what Dalton didn't know was, the woman behind the wheel not only had all the necessary paperwork, she also had enough power to wipe out his career before the rain even stopped. Her name is Sophia Vance, and while Dalton thought he was about to seize a stolen car, in reality, he was unknowingly picking up his own resignation letter. If you think this is just another typical case of police abuse of power, take a closer look at how this story ends. Because the twist in the courtroom that follows will make you understand one thing: sometimes a single calm phone call is enough to destroy a career built on lies. In Seattle, the rain doesn't make things any cleaner. It only made the stains more slippery and easier to spread. The rain-streaked roads at night reflected the pale yellow streetlights, stretching like cuts across the cold asphalt. That's why Sophia Vance hates driving at night. Not because of fear, but because I'm tired of it all. Time after time, year after year, the flashing red and green lights in the rearview mirror always bring with them the same familiar question: why me? Sophia's Bentley Continental GT glided smoothly down I-95, its speed steady, the engine a soft whisper. The clock showed 10:45 p.m., Tuesday. It was raining heavily, but the road was empty. She was on her way home after a late dinner with her brother Marcus, a rare occasion to celebrate his recent promotion at the hospital. The jazz music played softly in the car, just enough to keep one's breathing steady. Sophia adjusted the rearview mirror. The face reflected in it was calm, sharp, the experienced eyes of someone accustomed to remaining silent when necessary and acting at the right moment when needed. No one along the way knew that. 3 weeks earlier, Sophia Vance had received a call that would shape her entire career. She has just been appointed Chief of Internal Affairs at the state level, the head of the Internal Audit Department, with a single mission: to expose and eradicate the rampant corruption within law enforcement. A major campaign. A trap has been set. And for that reason, her name was kept completely secret. No press releases, no photos, no launch ceremony. To the public, Sophia was simply a wealthy, successful lawyer with refined taste. But for the corrupt police, those who abuse their power in the shadows, she is the nightmare that is about to unfold. The only problem is, they've never seen her face. Sophia pressed the accelerator gently, passing the Mercer Street exit. Everything was in order, not speeding, lights working properly, documents valid. And then, as if by a reflex that had become all too familiar, flashes of blue and red lights suddenly tore through the curtain of rain behind them. Sophia exhaled very slowly. Here we go again. There's no need to be afraid. But it was a cold, familiar feeling of boredom. She switched on her right turn signal, slowed down perfectly, and pulled over to the wide curb just after the exit. In her rearview mirror, she saw the number printed on the hood of the patrol car: Unit Cat Alpha Vingdo. Sophia memorized that number immediately. Little did she know that, in just a few minutes, that very number would become evidence and a verdict. Sophia parked the car precisely in the designated spot, a safe distance from the main lane. The rain continued to fall steadily, pattering against the Bentley's roof like an invisible countdown clock. She lowered the window just enough, no more, no less. Her hands rested neatly on the steering wheel, at the 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions, a familiar gesture of someone who knew all too well what the police expected to see. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't touch her phone. She waited. The patrol car doors swung open. The two officers stepped down at the same time, but immediately created two completely different impressions. The man who emerged from the driver's seat was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a muscular build, the kind that suggests someone spends more time in the gym than in law school. His buzz cut, his heavy, decisive strides were like an affirmation of power. It was Rick Dalton at the station. His nickname was the Hammer. A hammer. Hard, fast, no question. On the other side was a younger face, eyes still naive and full of tension. His hand hovered too close to the gun at his hip, as if afraid he wouldn't be able to react in time if something happened. Timothy Omari, a 6-month-old rookie, trying to learn to survive in Dalton's enormous shadow. Dalton walked straight to the glass door, raised the heavy flashlight, and shone it directly into Sophia's face. The blinding white light made her squint for a moment. License and registration. Now. No greetings. No introductions. No questions about why the car was stopped. Sophia blinked once, then looked up. Her voice was calm, low, and clear, without a hint of defiance or fear. "Good evening, officer. May I ask the reason for the stop before I reach for my documents?" That single, simple sentence was enough to make Dalton's face darken. He lowered the flashlight slightly, just enough to clearly see the woman in front of him, a black woman, elegantly dressed, sitting in a car that, in his mind, could not possibly belong to her. "You were swerving," Dalton said, his voice smooth as if he'd said it 100 times before, "and this vehicle matches the description of a luxury car reported stolen earlier tonight." A neat lie. Sophia took a slow breath. She knew exactly how she had been driving. She also knew there had been no such report. "I have not swerved, officer. Co-DAP, Jeong Vendeo. And this vehicle is registered in my name. I'm reaching for my purse on the passenger seat to retrieve my identification." Dalton suddenly slammed his hand down on the roof of the car. Bang! A jarring sound echoed through the rain, startling Omari. He turned to Dalton, stammering, "Rick, maybe we should just run the plate first." "Quiet," Dalton snapped, without turning around. He leaned close to the glass, his eyes icy cold. "Don't reach for anything," Dalton said slowly, each word a threat. "You move when I tell you to move." In that moment, Sophia understood one thing very clearly. This car stop is no longer related to traffic. It has become a power struggle, and Rick Dalton, a man who habitually uses fear to manipulate others, has just decided that tonight he'll strike the wrong person with his hammer. Dalton stood upright, his hands still resting on the roof of the Bentley, as if he owned it. Rain streamed down his arm, dripping onto the slightly open window. "Get out of the car, now." His tone wasn't a request, it was a command. Sophia turned her head and looked directly into Dalton's eyes, without flinching. Her voice remained chillingly calm. "I am not stepping out of the vehicle, officer. I am compliant. You have no probable cause to request me to exit. I will provide my license through this window." That remark ignited a fire in Dalton's pride. He wasn't used to hearing the law. He was used to being obeyed. "Unlock the door," Dalton growled. "Now." Sophia remained still. The rain intensified, the wind lashed harder. She knew every passing second was being recorded the dashcam behind her, and, if she were lucky, the body cam on Omari's chest. "I am asking you to unlock the door," Dalton Laplai, Gyeong Kao Hon. "Or I will break this window and drag you out." Sophia took a deep breath, then spoke slowly and clearly, as if reading from an official document. "I am unlocking the door under duress and fear for my physical safety." Click. Before the lock could even fully click, Dalton yanked the doorknob. The door burst open. Rain and wind rushed into the luxurious leather interior of the car. Dalton didn't wait. He reached inside, grabbed Sophia's left arm and the lapel of her trench coat. A rough pull. Sophia was yanked from the driver's seat, her heels slipping on the wet gravel. She staggered, and before she could regain her balance, Dalton spun her around, pressing her chest forcefully against the cold hood of his own car. "Hands on the hood," Dalton shouted. The sudden jolt left Sophia breathless. She braced herself against the cold, wet metal, feeling the raindrops mixed with road dust clinging to her skin. "Officer Dalton," she said, her voice breaking but still clear, "you are making a grave mistake." "Shut up!" Dalton yelled. He kicked her leg hard, forcing her legs apart, then began a rough, unnecessary search of her body. The patrol car's headlights shone directly onto the scene. Other cars slowed down, and the people inside turned to look. They saw a woman pinned to the hood of a car by a police officer and assumed she must be guilty. Dalton turned and yelled at Omari, "Search the car, tear it apart. I want drugs or cash." Sophia pressed her cheek against the cold hood, speaking loudly not to plead, but to acknowledge. "Officer O'Malley, if you enter my vehicle without a warrant or probable cause, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. You will be held personally liable." Omari stood motionless, his hand on the passenger side doorknob. He looked at Dalton, then at Sophia. Sweat mixed with rainwater trickled down his collar. Dalton spun around, gripping Sophia's arm tightly behind her back, causing her to let out a soft moan. "I gave you an order, rookie." And in that moment, the silence on the sidewalk became heavy and suffocating. It's no longer a traffic check. It's no longer a misunderstanding. From this moment on, Rick Dalton is no longer on duty. He is committing a crime. Omari stood still for a few seconds, his hand resting on the passenger side door, clearly hesitant. He knew with the intuition of a novice that things were going too far. "Rick, maybe we should just run her name first," Omari whispered, almost pleadingly. Dalton didn't bother to turn around. He tightened his grip on Sophia's arm behind her back, his voice growling amidst the rain. "She's a perp. Treat her like one." That statement sounded like a final command. Omari swallowed hard and opened the car door. The smell of new leather and cold metal filled the air. He rummaged through the glove compartment, pulled open the glove box, and tossed the insurance papers, owner's manual, and receipts onto the wet floor. There was nothing but perfectly legitimate paperwork. "Nothing here, Rick," Omari called out. Dalton immediately replied, "Check the trunk." Sophia pressed her cheek against the hood, her voice still even despite her arms being restrained. "This is harassment. I am asking once again to provide my identification. My wallet is in my purse." Dalton leaned close to her ear, his breath hot with the smell of coffee and anger. "I'll check your ID when we book you. Resisting. Disorderly. Maybe I'll add assault on an officer if you keep running your mouth." Click. The sound of handcuffs echoed coldly as Dalton locked Sophia's wrists. The metal dug deep into her skin. "You're hurting me," she said, not raising her voice. "Stop resisting," Dalton replied, even though Sophia didn't move. In the back of the car, Omari opened the trunk. Rainwater collected on the edge of the trunk and dripped onto the floor. He rummaged through his gym bag, finding a cardboard box and a few folders. Then he stopped. A thick hardcover file with clearly labeled tags. "Internal audit, classified." Omari gently pulled back a corner, just enough to see the writing inside. "Department of Justice Inquiry." Tim froze. His hands were visibly trembling. "Rick," his voice cracked. "Rick, come look at this." Dalton yelled back from the front, "I don't care what it is unless it's a kilo of coke." Omari didn't listen. He went around to the back, holding a thin leather wallet. He opened it. A heavy gold badge, gleaming under the headlights. Not a typical police badge. Next to it is the ID card. Sophia Vance, Chief of Internal Affairs. Special Prosecutor. Direct line to the governor. Omari's face turned pale. "Rick," he whispered, almost out of breath. "She's not a perp. She's Internal Affairs. She's the new chief." Dalton stood frozen in place. The rain continued to pour down, but his back felt burning hot, as if someone had thrown fire at it. He looked down at the woman he was pinning against the hood of the car. Sophia turned her head, just enough for their eyes to meet. In that moment, her eyes no longer held the gaze of someone whose car had been stopped. That was the prosecutor's gaze. "Officer Dalton," Sophia said slowly, her voice deepening with menace. "You have exactly 5 seconds to remove these handcuffs." She paused for a moment. "Or I will personally ensure you never wear a uniform again." Dalton swallowed hard. And in his mind, 2 things were fighting fiercely: the truth and the ego. Rick Dalton stood motionless in the rain, his eyes fixed on the gold badge in Omari's hand. For a brief moment, his mind grasped what was happening, but only for a moment. Then, the ego, the thing that had sustained him for 15 years of abuse of power, immediately counterattacked. Dalton laughed. A dry, forced, panicked laugh. "Nice try," he said, shaking his head. "Fake badge. Criminals are getting smarter every year. Omali Trunmat. Rick, this feels real. Look at the files. Look at the signature." "Shut up," Dalton quat. "Quay Fat Lai. You think internal affairs just drives around at midnight in a Bentley? This is a setup." He leaned close to Sophia's ear, his voice low but menacing. "Impersonating a federal official is a felony, sweetheart. You just made this worse." Sophia didn't react. No argument. No explanation. She just looked at him, a look that irritated Dalton more than any insult. "Officer O'Malley, Sophia Noi, Jongron va dut koat. You have a choice. Stop this illegal arrest now, or go down as an accomplice to civil rights violations and kidnapping." Omari looked at Dalton. Then she looked back at the words Chief of Internal Affairs on the card. "Rick, we should stop. Please." Dalton hesitated for half a second. Then, he made a decision. If he backs down now, he's admitting he was wrong. If he moves forward, he's still in control, at least in his head. "Turn around," Dalton roared, yanking Sophia away from the hood. "You're under arrest." "On what charge?" Sophia asked, her voice calm, resisting. "Disorderly." "Impersonation," Dalton rattled off, as if simply saying it quickly would make it true. He opened the back door of the patrol car and pushed Sophia inside. She lost her balance and fell onto the hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut, isolating her from the outside world. Inside the car, there was the smell of stale coffee, sweat, and hot plastic, a familiar scent of one-sided power. Dalton stood outside, shouting through the glass barrier, "You're going to jail. And when we get there, that little fake badge of yours gets melted down." Sophia sat up straight, her wrists still cuffed, her shoulder aching where it had been yanked hard, but on her lips was a very small smile, a smile that sent chills down Omari's spine. Dalton got into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. The engine started. "Rick, Omali Noi, Jeong Run Ray. We haven't read her rights. We didn't even run her name." Dalton brushed it aside. "I'm handling this." The patrol car rejoined the lane, rain pounding against the windshield. The wipers swept evenly, like an unintentional countdown. Sophia looked down at her wrist. The Apple Watch is still there. She waited for Dalton and Omari to begin arguing, their words hushed, hurried, and panicked. Then very softly, very calmly, she raised her wrist to her lips and whispered, "Hey Siri." The patrol car sped through the heavy rain, the wipers sweeping back and forth like a frantic heartbeat. Dalton drove with one hand, the other tapping lightly on the steering wheel, trying to appear calm. He was winning at least. That's what he thought. "You see, Tim?" Dalton said, his voice tinged with amusement. "This is how you handle entitled people. They bluff. You don't blink." Omari sat silently in the passenger seat, his hands clasped tightly together. He looked in the rearview mirror, where Sophia sat behind the scratched plastic window. She said nothing, no screaming, no pleading. It was that silence that frightened Omari. In the cramped car cabin, the smell of hot plastic and stale coffee mingled. Sophia gently lowered her wrist, touching her lips to the watch face. "Hey Siri," she whispered, "call Governor Thomas Sterling." The call connected almost instantly. "Sophia?" The governor's voice rang out, surprised by the late hour. "Is everything all right?" Sophia inhaled slowly. When she spoke, her voice was neither shaky nor high, just clear enough for each word to become an accurate report. "Tom, listen carefully. I've been assaulted, handcuffed, and detained without cause on I-95 North, Seattle PD, Unit 4, Alpha 22. Officer Rick Dalton." Silence on the other end of the line. The silence was so heavy that Sophia could feel it. "Are you safe right now?" the governor asked again, this time in a different tone, cold and sharp. "I'm handcuffed in the back of his cruiser. He's refusing to check my ID. He's about to book me for felony impersonation." Dalton glanced in the rearview mirror, a smirk playing on his lips as he saw Sophia whispering to herself. He guessed she was praying. Little did he know, she was activating an entire system. "Sophia. Thongdok noi, chum rai. Do not say another word to them. Keep the line open if you can. I'm calling the commissioner. State Patrol is being deployed. Give me 5 minutes." "I'll wait," Sophia replied curtly. "I'm not going anywhere. The call has ended." Sophia lowered her wrist, leaned back in her seat, her eyes calmly fixed on the ceiling of the car. She didn't need to do anything more. Everything had been recorded. Time was no longer on Dalton's side. Ahead, Dalton sneered. "You think that little act is going to save you?" He accelerated, deliberately skipping the familiar turn. "You missed the exit to the 4th precinct," Sophia said in a calm voice. Dalton glanced in the mirror, a smile curving his lips. "Scenic route. I want the paperwork clean before we get there." O'Malley Quay sang, "Rick, where are we going?" Dalton did not reply. Outside, the rain began to lighten. But in the rearview mirror, Omari suddenly saw distant red and green lights, not just one, but there were many of them. "So many." "Rick," Omari whispered, "we're not alone anymore." Dalton glanced quickly in the mirror, and for the first time that night, the smile on his face disappeared. The lights in the background are no longer an illusion. They approached very quickly. Not one car, not two. It was a long strip of red and blue lights stretching across the highway, reflecting onto the wet road surface, like a runway preparing for an emergency landing. Dalton squinted at the rearview mirror. His heart was pounding faster than usual, but his old instincts tried to calm him down. "Relax," he said to Omari, his voice hoarse but not trembling. "Probably chasing someone else." He moved to the left lane to give way. But the cars behind also moved. A large, low-slung black SUV with government license plates pulled up alongside the patrol car. Its engine rumbled loudly, giving the impression it wasn't chasing anyone. The window rolled down. A man in tactical armor, with a cold gaze, pointed directly towards the roadside. "Pull over, now." Dalton opened his mouth to argue, but at that moment, the car radio blared, not the familiar voice of the operator. His voice was deep, firm, and carried an authority that didn't need to be shouted. "Unit 4, Alpha 22. This is Colonel Jack Reynolds, Washington State Patrol." Dalton was speechless. "I repeat, kill your engine and pull over immediately. Failure to comply will result in a pit maneuver." Omari turned to Dalton, her voice almost breaking. "They're talking to us, Rick. They're pulling us over." Dalton gripped the steering wheel tightly. He'd never heard of using the PIT maneuver on a police car. That was a tactic for fleeing criminals. "Stay calm," Dalton said, but his hands were visibly shaking. "They probably think we're carjacked." He switched on his turn signal and steered to the right. The wheels skidded slightly on the wet mud, and the car came to a stop amidst the heavy rain. Before I could even turn off my engine, 4 State Patrol SUVs surrounded me from all sides, front, back, and left. Their high-powered headlights switched on, transforming the downpour into thousands of white sparks like fireworks. The loudspeaker blared, the sound reverberating straight into my chest. "Driver, step out of the vehicle with your hands up." Dalton opened the door and stepped out, raising both hands, trying to keep his voice normal. Hey, I'm police. Officer Rick Dalton, 4th Precinct. I've got a suspect in the back." No one responded with a greeting. Instead, a series of car doors opened simultaneously. The sound of metal, footsteps, the clicking of a radio. Dalton saw the stern faces of the state troopers. Then the governor's security detail. And finally the black jackets emblazoned with the letters FBI. Dalton swallowed hard. Behind the glass partition, Sophia Vance remained seated, her back straight, her gaze calm. She doesn't need to say anything. The storm she had called for has arrived. And at that moment, Rick Dalton realized something he should have known from the beginning. Tonight, he is no longer in power. The rain began to lessen, but the air on the highway's shoulder was thick and suffocating. Rick Dalton stood with his arms raised, the headlights shining directly into his face, making him squint like someone dragged out of a dark cave. "Easy, easy," Dalton said loudly, trying to keep his voice under control. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm the police. I detained a suspect." No one answered him. From the state patrol ranks, a woman emerged. She was tall, with neatly trimmed gray hair, and wore a dark trench coat. Each step she took was slow but heavy, like a hammer blow. Commissioner Elena Graves, the most influential voice in the state's law enforcement. She didn't look at Dalton. Her gaze was fixed on the rear door of the patrol car. "Officer Dalton," her voice rang out, calm but sharp. "Do not move." Dalton Newt Khan. "Commissioner, I can explain. She was driving erratically, vehicle matched." "Silence," Graves interrupted. Just one word, but it was enough to silence Dalton. 2 SWAT officers headed straight for the back door. Dalton panicked. "Careful. She's dangerous." They didn't answer. The back door swung open. "Miss Vance," an officer said softly, his voice full of respect, "we're here to get you out." Sophia Vance stepped out of the car. The rain had soaked her hair, and her coat clung to her body, but her posture remained straight and steady, like someone who had just stepped out of a courtroom, not the back seat of a patrol car. Her wrists were still handcuffed. The entire scene fell silent. Sophia looked at Commissioner Graves, nodded slightly. Then she turned to Rick Dalton. In that moment, her eyes no longer held the eyes of a victim. That's the look of someone who's just taken complete control of the game. "Commissioner, Sophia Noi, Gyeongdaeo, Kong Run. My wrists are bruised, my shoulder is strained, and my 4th Amendment rights have been violated." Graves Quay sang Dalton. That look made him take half a step back. "Do you know who she is?" Graves High. Dalton opened his mouth. No sound came out. Sophia took a step forward, the handcuffs glinting in the light like living proof. "There was no stolen vehicle report, Ko Noi. I checked the logs before I left dinner. He profiled me. He lied. And when he realized who I was, he doubled down." Dalton lap bop. No, I swear, she was swerving. I was just doing my job." A man in a suit walked out, holding up a tablet. Dashcam footage pulled from the cloud. Ong Noi. Vehicle maintained a straight lane, speed within limit. Officer Dalton failed to signal before activating lights. Dalton staggered. Graves turned to him. His voice lowered, more dangerous than a shout. "Unlock her cuffs, now." Dalton pulled out the keys. His hands trembled so much that he dropped them in the mud. He had to bend down to pick them up, kneeling before the woman he had just dragged out of the car. He stood up, walked closer to Sophia, and reached out his hand towards her wrist. "Don't touch me," Sophia said. That statement left Dalton frozen in place. A SWAT officer stepped forward, took the keys from Dalton's hand, and unlocked the handcuffs. A click sounded soft, but distinct. Sophia rubbed her bruised wrist, then looked directly at Dalton. "Officer Dalton," she said slowly, "you just crossed a line you cannot uncross." Dalton began to breathe heavily, and in that moment, he understood something terrible. This is no longer an investigation. This verdict is being written right here at the scene. Rick Dalton took a step back, then 2, until his back was touching the hood of the State Patrol SUV. He began to realize that no words could save him anymore. "Commissioner, this is being blown way out of proportion," Dalton managed to say, his voice hoarse. "At worst, this is a bad stop, A procedural issue. Sophia Vance turned to look at him. No anger, no sarcasm. It was just a cold, detached calm. "Oh, Rick," she said softly. "You didn't make a bad stop." She took a step closer, near enough for Dalton to hear every word clearly amidst the drizzling rain. "When you reached into my car and dragged me out, that was assault in the second degree." Dalton swallowed. "When you ignored my identification and drove me away, against my will," Sophia took, "that became kidnapping under color of law." Dalton opened his mouth to retort, but it was too late. "And when you ordered an illegal search, filed a false report, and tried to intimidate a witness, ko nyeng do nin o mali, that's obstruction of justice and deprivation of civil rights." The air around us felt frozen. Dalton Lochtalian. No, you can't do this. I have 15 years on the force. I have a union. I have a pattern," Sophia interrupted. "Ko Kwei Sang Commissioner Graves. 12 excessive force complaints in 5 years. 3 civil settlements, paid quietly by the city, over $2 million in taxpayer money." Dalton glared at her. "How do you—" "Because someone was finally watching," Sophia Dapp. She turned to the FBI team standing behind her. "Take him." The 2 agents stepped forward immediately. Dalton yelled, instinctively thrashing about like someone who used to be on the other side. "Wait, this is a mistake. I need my union rep." An agent held his arm tightly, his voice monotonous. "You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs tightened around Dalton's wrists, firm, cold, and non-negotiable. Click. That sound echoed from the side of the highway, exactly like the sound Sophia had heard before, except for one thing. This time, it belonged to him. Dalton turned around, panicked, searching for Omari. "Tim, tell them the truth. Tell them she resisted." Omari stood motionless, his face pale, his lips trembling. He looked at Dalton, who had once been his role model, his fear then at Sophia, and finally, he said the thing Dalton couldn't stand the most. "She didn't resist. Omali noi, Jeong Ra. She didn't do anything wrong. You told me to lie." Dalton was stunned. Commissioner Graves closed his eyes for a second, then opened them decisively. "Officer Omari, step forward." Omari stepped forward, trembling. "You are ordered to surrender your badge and weapon, Graves Noi. You are on administrative leave pending testimony." Omari took off his gun and badge and placed them in Graves's hand. Rain mingled with tears on the boy's face. Sophia looked at him, her voice not soft but fair. "I don't need your apology. I need your testimony." Omari nodded without hesitation. "You'll have it, all of it." Dalton was dragged toward the federal prison van. He struggled and screamed a bitter contrast to the silence Sophia had maintained all night. And in that moment, everything was decided. Rick Dalton is no longer a police officer. He is the defendant. 6 months have passed since that rainy night on I-95. For the city of Seattle, it was 6 months of emergency meetings, chilling press releases, and unsparing questions about how power had been abused. For Rick Dalton, time practically stands still. On the first day of the trial, he walked into the courtroom in an expensive gray suit, chin held high, trying to retain the last vestiges of his image as the Hammer. He still believed in what had saved him for years. The green wall of silence. The courtroom was packed. On the left were people wearing Justice for Sophia shirts. On the right were a few familiar faces from the police union. The atmosphere was so tense it could cut through with a knife. Dalton's lawyer, Robert Thorne, stood up to begin. His voice was deep, smooth, and full of the confidence of someone accustomed to manipulating public opinion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Thorne but Doe. It was a dark, stormy night. Visibility was poor. Officer Dalton made a split-second decision to protect the public. He took a few steps, his gaze sweeping across the jury. Yes, voices were raised, tempers flared, but rudeness is not a felony. What we have here is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion because the driver happened to be a powerful, politically connected woman who didn't like being told what to do. Dalton nodded slightly, muttering to himself, "That's right. Make her seem arrogant. Make myself seem like a man on a mission. Then, it was the turn of the prosecution's first witness, Sophia Vance. The entire courtroom fell silent. Sophia stepped up to the witness stand in a neat, cream-colored suit. No elaborate jewelry, no superfluous expressions. She placed her hand on the Bible, took the oath, and then sat down. She didn't tell the story through emotion. She told the story in chronological order, stopping time markers, distance from lanes, each traffic law violated. Every word she says is precise, concise, and leaves no room for argument. Thorne stood up to counterattack, trying to break the calm. Miss Vance, Ongtanoi, you were driving a high-performance Bentley. Isn't it possible you accelerated too quickly in the rain, causing Officer Dalton to believe you were swerving? Sophia didn't blink. The telemetry data from the vehicle, CODAP, entered into evidence as Exhibit C, shows zero loss of traction at any point. Thorne paused. He changed direction. You refused to exit the vehicle when ordered. That's failure to comply, isn't it? I refused an unlawful order, Sophia corrected, her voice calm. There is a difference. Then Thorne threw the final card, his voice rising. You used your political influence. You called the governor instead of 911 to get special treatment. The entire courtroom held its breath. Sophia leaned towards the microphone, her gaze fixed. Mr. Thorne, when the police become the criminals, who exactly do you suggest a citizen should call? A murmur spread through the courtroom. Even the judge had to tap his gavel to restore order. Thorne returned to his seat, his face tense. Dalton began to feel a cold sweat run down his spine. Because he didn't know that, the worst was yet to come. That afternoon, the courtroom heated up, not because of the weather, but because of what everyone was waiting for. The prosecutor stood up. The state would like to play Exhibit A. The lights in the courtroom dimmed. A large screen was lowered in front of the jury. Rick Dalton straightened his back, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. He believed he still had a way out. That it was all just back and forth, a way of interpreting things. The screen turned on. The image appeared. A stretch of I-95 highway on a rainy night. The Bentley drove smoothly, straight, without swaying or accelerating. Then, a sound rang out. This is not the time to stop the car. But that was before. Rick Dalton's voice rang out clearly, completely unaware he was being recorded. Brand new Bentley. Black driver. Seattle plates. A moment of silence. Maybe tech money? Omari's voice was young and hesitant. Dalton Kuikai. Nah, that's drug money. Or it's stolen. Run the lights. The entire courtroom seemed to lose all its air. The jury turned to look at Dalton. It's no longer a misunderstanding. It's no longer a judgment made under adverse circumstances. That was deliberate prejudice, even before the law was implemented. Dalton began to breathe heavily. But the video isn't over yet. Screenshot. Sophia is dragged out of the car, pressed against the hood, handcuffed too tightly. No screaming, no resistance. Then there's the scene in the patrol car sounds that Dalton thought were private. His voice was harsh and full of anger. I don't care who she is. We book her. We lose the dashcam footage. The system crashes all the time. It's her word against mine. And I'm the cop. The prosecutor pressed the pause button. The frame freezes at the exact moment. Dalton's face is struck by a flash of lightning, a face distorted by power and the certainty that he will never be punished. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Attorney Robert Thorne bowed his head, covering his face with his hands. He knew perfectly well, all his tactics, all his arguments, were dead. Then Timothy Omari was called in. There are no more uniforms. Just a young man standing before the witness stand, his voice trembling but clear. He taught me how to delete footage. On my second day, he called it cleaning up paperwork. Dalton spun around and yelled, "You're lying!" But no one looked at him anymore. The jury left the room. 4 hours and 15 minutes later, they returned. Foreman stood up, paper in hand, his voice hoarse but firm. On all counts, we find the defendant guilty. Rick Dalton slumped to the ground. The judge looked directly at him. his voice cold. You were given a badge and a gun. You believed that made you the law. But your most dangerous act was not the arrest, it was your attempt to erase the truth. Dalton Run Ray, Your Honor, I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake, the judge interrupted. You made a choice. The court sentenced the defendant to 15 years in federal prison, with a minimum of 12 years before being eligible for parole. The sound that echoed through the courtroom was the clicking of handcuffs. Click. Click. It was the same sound Sophia Vance had heard on the highway 6 months earlier, on a rainy night. Dalton turned his head, searching for a look of pity. Sophia stood up. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She looked at him with the eyes of someone who had turned on the light and was no longer afraid of the dark. She whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Drive safe. The courtroom doors closed. Outside, it's still raining in Seattle, but from that night onward, something changed. Not because of a Bentley, not because of a phone call, but there are people calm enough not to fear false power and patient enough to wait. And that is how a dive call works. He has come to an end a career that was built